Welcome back to Coin Explorer Vault. There is something unsettling about the 2005 Roosevelt Dime, because at first glance, it looks like exactly the kind of coin most people would have spent without a second thought. The year is 2005, the denomination is only 10 cents, and the Denver mint mark seems almost ordinary, yet some claims surrounding a 2005 Roosevelt Dime have placed an astonishing potential figure of $57 million on the table. Now, before you reach for an old coin jar and start counting your change, understand something important. That enormous figure should be treated as a claimed or hypothetical value, not a verified price for an ordinary 2005 dime. But that does not make the story uninteresting. In fact, it makes the mystery even better, because the real question is not simply, is this dime worth $57 million? The real question is, what could possibly make a small 10-cent coin attract a claim that sounds almost unbelievable? Think back to the years when coins passed quietly through our hands, at the grocery store, the gas station, the neighborhood shop, or perhaps into a glass jar on a kitchen shelf. In 2005, millions of Americans were handling Roosevelt dimes without ever imagining that collectors decades later might examine the smallest details under magnification. The 2005 Roosevelt dime was struck at the Denver Mint, and that little D mint mark is one of the first things you should check. Turn the coin over to the obverse and look beneath the date area, where the mint mark identifies the Denver origin. Roosevelt's portrait dominates the front, with Liberty and I in God We Trust surrounding the design, while the reverse carries the familiar torch, olive branch, and oak branch, along with United States of America, one dime, and E pluribus unum. To most people, these details are simply part of a familiar design. To a collector, however, they are places where a story can begin. But that isn't the detail collectors notice first. Condition may be far more important than the date alone. A 2005 dime that spent years circulating in pockets, cash registers, and vending machines can show scratches, dull surfaces, contact marks, and wear. Another example may have been placed into a collection almost immediately after leaving the mint, protected from the rough journey that ordinary pocket change experiences. That difference can dramatically affect collector interest. And this is where the story gets even more interesting. If you have one of these dimes, do not immediately assume that a shiny appearance means it is rare, and do not assume that every unusual-looking mark is an official mint error. Collectors know that genuine errors and varieties require careful examination and, when appropriate, professional authentication. A strange line could be a scratch. A doubled-looking letter could be damage or machine doubling. A flattened area could come from circulation rather than the minting process. The challenge is separating an authentic error or unusual variety from ordinary wear and damage. Take the coin into good light, hold it by the edges, and examine the date, the mint mark, the lettering, Roosevelt's portrait, and the reverse design. A small magnifying glass can help. Look especially for unusual doubling, missing or distorted design elements, abnormal surfaces, or characteristics that appear consistent and repeatable rather than random damage. The date catches your attention, but the real clue may be somewhere else. And that is why serious collectors do not stop at the year. They inspect the entire coin. Imagine an old family coin jar sitting in a drawer, perhaps untouched for 20 years. Maybe it belonged to a parent or grandparent who saved interesting change simply because they liked the sound of coins dropping into a container at the end of the day. Somewhere among ordinary pennies, nickels, quarters, and dimes could be a coin worth examining more carefully. Not necessarily because it is secretly worth millions, but because every unusual piece deserves a closer look before its story is dismissed. The $57 million figure associated with this 2005 Roosevelt dime is extraordinary, but without reliable documentation proving an actual sale at that amount, it should never be presented as a guaranteed market value. Real-world coin values depend on authentication, rarity, minting characteristics, preservation, grading, demand, and documented sales. That distinction matters, especially for older viewers who remember a time when a dime could buy something meaningful and when people saved coins for years without thinking of them as investments. There is something beautiful about that history. A dime is small enough to disappear into a pocket, yet old enough to carry memories. And there is another question worth asking: how many 2005 dimes are still sitting in collections, jars, drawers, or forgotten boxes today. We cannot know how many contain an unusual characteristic without examining them individually. That is why your own inspection can be worthwhile. Compare your dime with reliable reference images. Use magnification. Avoid cleaning the coin. And if you believe you have a genuinely unusual error or variety, consider having it examined by a reputable numismatist or grading service. Never polish it to make it look newer, because cleaning can permanently reduce collector appeal. The safest rule is simple: preserve first, investigate second. And remember, a coin does not have to be worth a fortune to be fascinating. Sometimes the greatest discovery is learning why a seemingly ordinary object survived, where it traveled, and how it ended up in your hands. The 2005 Roosevelt Dime may have been minted for everyday commerce, but decades later, its tiny details can still raise enormous questions. And if that D is sitting beneath the date on a dime you found in an old collection, don't spend it until you have taken a closer look. Because the next coin in our journey takes us to another Roosevelt dime, another year, and another remarkable claim that will make you wonder just how much mystery can hide inside 10 cents. Next, let's turn our attention to the 2005 Roosevelt dime, and this time, the number attached to the story becomes even more astonishing: $63 million. Imagine finding a dime in an old coffee can, a dresser drawer, or a collection that has been sitting untouched since your children were young, only to discover that someone has claimed a coin of this type could command a figure that sounds more like the price of a mansion than 10 cents. But before excitement takes over, there is an important distinction every serious collector should understand. A $63 million figure for an ordinary 2005 Roosevelt dime is not a verified standard market value. It should be treated as a claimed, estimated, or hypothetical figure unless supported by documented evidence of a specific coin, authentication, and an actual sale. Still, that enormous number gives us a reason to investigate. What could make one small dime dramatically different from another carrying the exact same date and mint mark? The answer may be hidden in details so tiny that you could miss them with the naked eye. The 2005 Roosevelt dime was produced at the Denver Mint, and the D mint mark is one of the first clues to confirm. On the obverse, you see the familiar portrait of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, with liberty and I in God we trust surrounding him, and the date 2005 near the lower portion of the design. On the reverse is the classic torch, surrounded by an olive branch and an oak branch, with United States of America, 1 dime, and E pluribus unum completing the design. To someone paying for a cup of coffee or receiving change at a store, these details might never receive a second glance. But collectors learn to look differently. They know that the difference between an ordinary coin and a collectible curiosity can sometimes be hidden in a tiny feature, a minting anomaly, an unusual surface, or exceptional preservation. And this is where your own dime deserves a careful inspection. Start with the date. Is every digit clearly formed? Does anything appear doubled, distorted, unusually close, or different from a normal example? Then examine the mint mark. Is the D clearly defined? Does it appear normal when compared with authenticated examples? After that, slowly move across the lettering and portrait. Look at Liberty, Indiana God We Trust, the lettering around the reverse, and the torch. You are not searching for scratches simply because they look unusual. You are searching for something that could have originated during the minting process. That distinction is critical. A coin can pick up damage almost anywhere during decades of handling, and what appears mysterious at first may simply be a contact mark, scrape, discoloration, or environmental damage. A genuine mint error or unusual variety requires much stronger evidence. That is why collectors compare coins, consult references, and sometimes seek professional authentication. But there is another clue that can be even more important than an unusual mark condition. Think about 2 identical dimes leaving the mint in 2005. One enters circulation and spends years bouncing around pockets, cash drawers, vending machines, and coin counters. Its surfaces become scratched and dull. The other is placed into a collection almost immediately and protected from contact. Decades later, those 2 coins may look dramatically different. This is why grading matters so much. Collectors evaluate preservation carefully, looking for wear, marks, luster, and overall quality. A coin that looks bright under household lighting is not automatically a high-grade specimen. and a coin that looks old is not necessarily rare. The entire condition must be considered. But there is something else that makes this 2005D story especially interesting for people who grew up saving coins. Many of us remember the old jars and containers where loose change accumulated over the years. Perhaps there was a jar on a shelf, a bowl near the front door, or a drawer where coins were tossed after a shopping trip. Some families saved silver coins. Others saved wheat pennies. Some simply kept whatever looked interesting. And because coins can remain hidden for years, a modern coin such as a 2005D dime can become a forgotten time capsule of everyday American life. The coin itself may not be rare simply because it is old enough to have memories attached to it, but its journey can still be fascinating. Now, here is the question that keeps this mystery alive. If a 2005D dime really had an extraordinary characteristic, would you recognize it? That is where patience becomes more valuable than excitement. Do not clean the coin. Do not polish the surfaces. Do not scrape away discoloration or try to improve an apparent error. Cleaning can damage the original surface and potentially hurt collector appeal. Instead, hold the coin carefully by its edges and use magnification. Examine both sides under consistent lighting. Photograph unusual areas from several angles. Compare them with known examples. If the feature still appears unusual, seek an experienced numismatist or professional grading service. Remember, the goal is not to turn every strange-looking dime into a fortune. The goal is to identify what is genuinely unusual, and that difference separates careful collecting from internet rumors. The $63 million claim is certainly dramatic, but responsible collectors need evidence before accepting any extraordinary valuation. A documented auction record, professional certification, and a clearly identified rarity would be necessary before such a figure could be treated as established fact. Until then, consider it a fascinating claim that invites investigation rather than a guaranteed payday. And perhaps that is the real lesson hidden inside this little dime. Sometimes we search our old collections expecting treasure, only to discover something more meaningful, a piece of our own history. Maybe the coin came from a parent. Maybe it was saved by a grandparent. Maybe it spent years in a pocket during an ordinary American morning, long before anyone thought it might become interesting to collectors. But the story does not end with 2005. There is another Roosevelt dime waiting in our journey, and its date takes us back to an earlier chapter when American coins carried a different sense of time and when details on a small piece of metal could become clues to a much larger story. So before you close that old coin drawer, keep your eyes open, because our next Roosevelt dime may have an even more intriguing secret waiting to be uncovered. Next, let's turn our attention to the 1989 Roosevelt dime, a coin that can look so ordinary that you might pass over it without a second thought. Yet a remarkable $67 million claim has been associated with this date and mint mark combination. Now, let us slow down here, because responsible collecting requires us to separate an exciting claim from a documented fact. A normal 1989 Roosevelt dime is not automatically worth $67 million, and that figure should be treated as a claimed, hypothetical, or unverified value unless a specific coin can be identified, professionally authenticated, and supported by reliable evidence of an actual sale. Still, there is something captivating about this little dime. The date takes us back to 1989, when many families were still taking photographs with film cameras, shopping in local stores, keeping coins in jars, and slipping loose change into drawers without imagining that decades later, someone might examine those same coins under magnification. So ask yourself this: could a dime that once passed through an ordinary American pocket contain a feature that collectors would consider genuinely unusual? That is where the investigation begins. The 1989 Roosevelt dime was struck at the Philadelphia Mint, identified by the P Mint mark on the obverse. In 1989, this familiar Roosevelt design was already deeply established in American daily life. Franklin D. Roosevelt's portrait faces left on the front, with liberty and "I in God we trust" surrounding the design, while the reverse presents the torch between an olive branch and an oak branch, surrounded by United States of America, 1 dime, and E pluribus unum. For most people, it was simply 10 cents. Maybe it was received as change at a grocery store, dropped into a coat pocket, placed beside a telephone, or saved in a household container with dozens of other coins. But collectors see something different. They see a date, a mint mark, a manufacturing history, a physical condition, and a series of questions. Start with the date. Look closely at each digit in 1989. Does anything appear doubled? Is the shape consistent with normal examples? Does the spacing look correct? Then move immediately to the P mint mark. This tiny letter is easy to overlook, but it confirms that the coin came from Philadelphia. Do not stop there. Examine the portrait, lettering, rim, and reverse design. Look for unusual characteristics that appear to be part of the coin itself rather than damage that occurred after leaving the mint. And this is where the story gets even more interesting, because a strange-looking coin can be misleading. A scratch can look like doubling. A dent can distort a letter. A damaged rim can resemble a minting problem. Discoloration can make a normal surface appear mysterious. Serious collectors learn to ask a simple question. Was this feature created at the mint, or did it happen later? That question can make all the difference. If you believe your 1989 P dime has a genuine error or unusual variety, compare it with trustworthy references and, when warranted, seek professional authentication. Never assume that every imperfection is an error. There is another factor that can quietly transform collector interest condition. Picture two 1989 P dimes sitting side by side. One may have spent years circulating through thousands of hands, collecting scratches and wear along the way. The other might have been removed from circulation almost immediately and stored carefully in a collection. Although they share the same date and mint mark, their surfaces can tell completely different stories. Collectors pay close attention to preservation, and professionally graded examples can be evaluated far more precisely than a casual glance allows. This is why you should never clean a coin in an attempt to make it look more valuable. Polishing, rubbing, chemical cleaning, or abrasive treatment can permanently alter the surface. If you find an interesting specimen, preserve it exactly as you found it. Hold it by the edges, use gentle lighting, and examine it with magnification. Take clear photographs if you notice something unusual. Compare those photographs with confirmed examples rather than relying on a dramatic claim posted online. Now think about where your own 1989 coins might have gone. Perhaps there is a box in the attic that has not been opened in years. Maybe an old family collection is tucked into a drawer. Perhaps someone in your family saved coins simply because they enjoyed collecting them. Many older collectors remember those quiet moments of sorting change at the kitchen table, separating pennies from nickels and dimes, checking dates almost as a habit. Those memories are part of what makes coin collecting so special. The value is not always financial. Sometimes the coin is valuable because it connects us to a person, a place, or a period of American life that cannot be recreated. But when a claimed number like $67 million enters the story, curiosity naturally takes over. What would have to be true for such a figure to become credible? First, the specific coin would need to be identified. Then any alleged error or variety would need to be established. Its condition would need to be evaluated. Professional authentication could become important, especially if the claimed characteristic were extraordinary. Finally, there would need to be reliable market evidence supporting the valuation. Without those pieces, the $67 million number remains a dramatic claim rather than a guaranteed value. And that distinction is especially important because ordinary 1989 P Roosevelt dimes are not automatically rare simply because they are from 1989. The real mystery lies in the specific coin. That is the clue you should remember. Don't ask only, "Do I have a 1989 P dime?" Ask, "What exactly is different about the one I have?" The answer could be nothing unusual, and that is perfectly normal. But if something truly catches your eye, investigate before spending it. The next time you sort through an old jar, don't rush. Let the light move across the surface. Check the date. Check the mint mark. Check the rim. Check the lettering. Look at both sides. Then stop and ask yourself whether the unusual feature can be explained by ordinary circulation damage or whether it deserves a closer examination. Sometimes the most exciting discoveries begin with a coin that nobody thought was important. A little dime can survive decades almost unnoticed, moving silently from one pocket to another until one careful collector finally decides to look twice. And that is the enduring mystery of the 1989 P Roosevelt dime. Not that every example is secretly worth millions, but that one specific coin, with the right combination of authenticity, rarity, error, or variety, and exceptional condition, could tell a very different story from the millions of ordinary coins around it. So if an old 1989p dime is sitting somewhere in your collection, don't dismiss it simply because it looks familiar. Pick it up, examine it carefully, preserve it properly, and remember why collectors have spent generations searching through ordinary change, because sometimes history hides in the smallest places, waiting for someone patient enough to notice. And here at Coin Explorer Vault, that is where the real adventure begins, not with believing every extraordinary number, but with learning how to recognize the extraordinary coin when it is actually in front of you.